Okay, we're going to take a look at July 2003, question 6. It's a wills question. It's only wills. In fact, wills has stood on its own only 4 times in the last 10 years. It's usually crossed over with community property or trusts. So I wanted to select essays that were just wills so we could focus on wills for right now. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. It says, what rights, if any, do Al, Carl, Norm, Deb, Eve, and SU have in Tom's estate? A lot of parties. Well, think about that. If the examiners give you this many parties, they're all not going to matter a lot. But here's how you answer the call of the question. We're going to deal with Al first. We're going to deal with Carl second. And this is exactly the way you do it on the exam. Norm, Deb, Eve, and SU. Now notice what it says. First of all, it says discuss, which is what you want. It doesn't say memorize, it doesn't say solve it, it just says discuss it, which means you have to explain what's going on. But you know it's a wills question because it says answer according to California law. And when they put that right there, they're talking about the whole essay is answered according to California law, which means it's either solely wills or wills and community properties. There's no trust here. Trust is not a California specific subject. Wills is. So pay attention to the details, the clues the examiners give you. A lot of people don't pay attention to that. They blindly just quickly read it, which makes no sense to me, and then they start writing. It's like, I'm an expert at this, and I can't start writing for the first 10 to 15 minutes, and I know this stuff like the back of my hand. So when you see someone next to you starting to type with the first minute, just laugh, give them my card, because they'll be in my class next time. Okay, notice something, too, about this question, if you quickly glance at something. And this is how wills questions, and a lot of questions, contracts, wills, they tend to do this. The first paragraph starts in 1998, the second paragraph in 1999, the third in 2000, the fourth in 2001, and then the fifth, Tom dies in 2002. Notice the chronological order of it. Makes it really easy to organize, but here we're organizing by party because that's what they ask. Okay, in 1998, Tom executed a valid will. So we know, and we're going to go over here now for 1998. And one of the things that I tend to do to make it real easy this is just 5 mini questions. It's not a big essay. It's like, how do you eat a watermelon? Bite, bite, bite. You don't try to swallow the whole thing. Notice how what I did, and this is a really good example of how to attack essays on the bar exam when they give you dates. They'll notice like mostly the dates will be in the first word of the first paragraph or the second word in the first paragraph, the second word in each paragraph. So just go chronological order to kind of keep things organized in your mind because that's how you're going to have to discuss them. And on the bar exam, I literally draw these lines because it helps me compartmentalize everything so I know how to discuss things in turn. Okay, in 1998, Tom executed a valid will. So validly executed, got it. No formation issues, you don't even get into it. The examiners are not testing formation in 1998. The dispositive provisions of the will said, oh, 100 grand to Al. So Al gets in 1998, 100 grand valid will. My residence on Elm Street to my sister Beth. Bet you didn't even up here. Okay, so Beth's not even here. So guess what? She's probably going to die. And if it's his sister Beth, I have to think, well, where do siblings come into play? Ah, they're blood relatives. We're going to get lapse and anti-lapse. I can almost guarantee it. Because why else would the examiners tell you it's a sister or brother? They leave the biggest clues out there. And it's amazing how quickly, once you understand it and once you kind of go through a few of these examples, you're like, oh yeah, why else would they be giving me a sister who's not even listed as a beneficiary? I mean, she gets provision number 2. So we know when Beth dies, one of these people are going to be Beth's issue. And that's how we know we're going to apply lapse and anti-lapse. But if you're reading it fast, if you're not paying attention to detail, this is all going to go over your head. So slow down and think and read carefully. Because that's what lawyers do. My Omega stock to my brother Carl. Carl gets some Omega stock. So Omega stock. Perfect. The residue of my estate to SU. Oh, wow, that was easy. Too bad it didn't end there. In 1999, Tom had a falling out with Al and executed a valid codicil that expressly revoked paragraph 1 of the will but made no other changes. So 1999, we have codicil. It says valid codicil. But you might want to tell the examiners what a codicil is. And a codicil is an amendment to the will. And so we have revocation by subsequent instrument. Because the 1999 will, you see how everything just starts falling into place? Revocation by subsequent instrument, and it says valid that expressly revoked. So this is express revocation. It's not implied. It's not like it was an inconsistent revision. It's not like he gave the $100,000 that he had to somebody else. Besides, it's a general devise anyways. $100,000 is cash. It's a general devise. So, but made no other changes. So everything else stays intact. In 2000, Tom reconciled with Al and told several people, Al doesn't need to worry. I provided it for him. So if he's telling other people, that's extrinsic evidence we're going to use to help explain if he wants to revive this. Now, I did jump ahead. You wouldn't know that, but I'm going to tell you that's where it's going. In 2001, there goes his sister Beth. Beth died without a will, survived by one child, Norm. Okay, so Beth, Norm. So the gift to Beth lapsed, but it's going to be saved by anti-lapse. So because she was blood relative, who left issue? Okay. Survived by only one child, Norm. Oh, and two grandchildren, Deb and Eve. So if we have Norm, so now Norm, Deb, and Eve can all go here. So here's how it goes. It went Beth, she had Norm, two grandchildren, Deb and Eve, who are the children of a predeceased child of Beth. That means Beth had another child here who gave us Deb and Eve. Now we can see all these people come together. And isn't it nice the examiners, look, so there's only really 4 people. One of them is the residuary beneficiary. This is going to be, what started out looking like it was going to be difficult is so easy. So here, now we have an equal degrees of kinship. So it's going to be per capital with right of representation. You don't even need to use those words, but technically that's what it is. So how much did he leave? He left the residence of, residence. So here, it's probably going to be like 50% here, 25% there. I'm just thinking right now, thinking out loud. So I had 2 grandchildren, Deb and Eve, who were the children of a predeceased child of Beth. That means she had a child that died, before she did, and Norm's alive, so the Norm can't be it. That's letting you know there's 2. This is why you have to read carefully, because we're children of a predeceased child of Beth. So you have to understand what that means and think about it. Children of a predeceased child. This child's dead, so then it goes down there. Okay. Also in 2001, Tom sold his Omega stock and reinvested the proceeds by purchasing Alpha stock. So it seems like the gift to Carl has now redeemed because the gift is gone. So we have redemption. But don't forget, courts don't like when things fall apart. They don't like forfeitures. And so it's only going to redeem if it's a specific devise, not if it's a general devise. Because a general devise is payable by the assets of the estate. So just because Omega stock turned into, Alpha Corp stock, you have to ask yourself, the court's going to think about this. Because who's Carl? It's his brother. Do you think that Tom was thinking about the gift, or was he thinking about the person? I mean, do you think Tom has any love for Omega or Alpha? Probably not, because if he was thinking about the gift, then it would be a unique gift, a distinct gift, a specifically identifiable gift, which would be in a specific devise, which redemption would apply. But if it was a general devise, because I don't think Tom's married to the stock, I don't think he cares about the stock, he probably likes his brother more than the stock. I know I buy and sell stock all the time. I'm not married to Apple. I'm not married to IBM or Priceline or any kind of stock that I buy, Sun Edison. So my guess is the court's going to consider this a general devise, save the gift, and redemption won't apply. You just have to, I don't care what your conclusion is, just discuss it. Okay. Tom died, 2002. The will and the codicil were found in a safe deposit box, which is good, because if it's found in a safe deposit box, what are the examiners trying to tell you? It's a place where things are kept safely, where no one's going to mess with it. It's a place where the testator probably is the only one who had access. And the will was unmarred, but the codicil had the words null and void. So now here we have revocation by physical act. Because what happened was he had a 98 will, which was valid. He had the 99 codicil, which was valid. And so that codicil expressly revoked the 98 will. It's revocation by subsequent instrument. Then we had the codicil revoked by physical act. The question is this will 1, is it revived? And the answer is, well, what did he intend to do? Because a lot of wills essays, in fact, almost every single one of them, will focus on the testator's intent some way or the other. So do you think that Tom intended for his friend Al to take the $100,000? Well, what did he say in 2000? Hey, I reconciled with Al. He doesn't need to worry. I provided for him. In that case, the revival is most likely to apply. You can use extrinsic evidence because this is the only thing that we have to go on. So the court's going to look, what did he mean? You get people testify, and they go, no, he said that. Everything's cool. He's going to get the money. So we're going to have revival, and will 1's going to go into effect. Al's going to end up taking the $100,000. So null and void is written across the text of the codicil in Tom's handwriting, followed by Tom's signature. Handwriting. Clue, that is, it's a revocation by physical act. And we have it's holographic too. You can look at it as like a holographic codicil. How would you, a holographic will, because I mean, he put in his handwriting and he signed his name. Because it said he wrote null and void across the top, and it was in his handwriting followed by a signature, which is as good as a holographic will or revocation by physical act, however you want to put it. Definitely discuss both. Tom was survived by everybody here. At the time of his death, his estate consisted of $100,000 in cash, the residence on Elm Street, so the residence did not redeem, and the Alpha Corp stock, which is in lieu of the Omega stock. So let's take a look at what we have here. Under Al, we're going to have, the first thing is, he made the will, that was valid in 1998. Then we had the validly executed codicil, which is an amendment to the will. Then that was expressly revoked by a subsequent instrument. But then we had the revocation by physical act, or it's kind of like almost a holographic will that goes ahead and revokes the codicil from 1999. And the question becomes, and this is where your analysis is a factor and what the graders are actually looking for. No, they're not looking for headings. They're not looking for buzzwords. As a grader, I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for specifically that. Don't forget, 8 people grade your exam. Each individual grader is responsible for one particular essay. They know this essay inside and out. And they know as well as I know your analysis and revival and what Tom's intent was is key here. Not so much that you spot the issues. It's like, how well did you discuss the issue that's important? Okay, now Carl. Question is, did the Omega stock redeem? Was it a specific devise or a general devise? I think the better analysis included what the court will come to, finds it a general devise because he was thinking about the beneficiary rather than the gift. Carl's going to take the Omega stock. I was going to take the $100,000. Now, what about Norm, Deb, and Eve? Well, first of all, the gift to Beth lapsed. It's going to be saved by the anti-lapse statute. And here, we're going to have to break it down into, because we have Norm, Eve, and Deb, Eve, and Norm. you're going to have to do a percentage. So Norm's going to get 50% of the house's worth. Obviously, the court's probably going to sell it, or go ahead, you guys. You could take your joint tenants with Norm carrying a 50% and Deb and Eve carrying 25% of the property. They could just hold title that way. That's totally fine. But that's how it's going to go. That's called the per capita with right of representation. So it's equal at each level, and the first level is split in half, and this level is split in half again. So that's how you get 50, 25, and 25. And the last thing is SU. All they are, they're the residuary beneficiary. They take what remains in the estate, and I don't think there's anything left. Yeah, there's nothing left. So they get nada. That's it. And believe it or not, once you organize it like this, I would do it on my paper. Pay attention to the dates and everything goes chronologically. Read carefully and really pay attention to the facts. It's so important to read the facts carefully. Slow down. Read the fact pattern several times before you even think about writing. Go ahead and make notes and everything. But once you should already know, if I did this, we probably spent, I don't know, I belabored the point. It's probably been about 15 minutes. How long has it been? About 15 minutes. And I belabored the point. 15 minutes is a long time, and I'm writing everything too, not just thinking about it. So if you're on the exam, and I can guarantee I will crush this in 45 minutes because now I know exactly where I need to spend my time, specific versus general, the testator's intent, whether he wanted will 1 revived, how he gave the house to her, and how it lapsed, but the anti-lapse statute saves it, and this is just quick rule-based, not analysis-based. They get nothing, there's nothing there, and that's a wrap. So I don't think there's much more to say. That's the recap of July 2003, question 6. It's a straight Wills question, and it covers some pretty good areas there. Thanks for listening. This was One Time.